When Ethan bought the countryside farm, he wanted nothing more than a quiet life. After years in the noisy city, filled with traffic, late meetings, and empty rooms, he wanted silence. Something real, something peaceful. The farm he found sat far from the main road, at the end of a dirt lane covered with yellow leaves and dust. When he first saw it, the house looked old but alive, like it was waiting for someone to come back. The white paint on the wooden walls had peeled in long streaks. The porch leaned a little to the right, and the windmill beside the barn creaked as it turned slowly. Still, Ethan saw something beautiful in it. It wasn't perfect, but neither was he. He signed the papers, packed up his life from a small rented apartment, and drove out there with his old pickup truck filled with boxes, tools, and a single suitcase. When he reached the front gate, the late afternoon sun made the fields look golden. The air smelled of hay and distant rain. He parked the truck, stepped out and stretched, feeling a kind of freedom he hadn't known in years. But as he walked closer to the house, he noticed something strange. The curtains in the front window moved slightly as if someone had been watching. Ethan froze. He thought the place was empty. He had double-checked the papers, even visited once before when the real estate agent said it was unoccupied. Slowly, he climbed the porch steps and pushed open the front door. It wasn't locked. The first thing he saw was light coming from the kitchen, then voices. Not loud, but soft, like women talking among themselves. He stood there for a moment, confused. Then 3 women turned toward him. The first one, a tall woman with light brown hair tied back in a loose braid, wiped her hands on a towel. "You must be Ethan," she said calmly, as if she already knew him. "We've been expecting you." Ethan blinked. "Expecting me?" he asked, unsure what else to say. The second woman, a quiet one with dark hair and soft eyes, smiled politely. She was holding a basket of vegetables. The third woman, younger and cheerful, was painting an old chair near the window. The air smelled like fresh bread, paint, and wood smoke all mixed together. "I think there's been a mistake," Ethan said slowly. "I bought this place last month." The real estate agent said. The tall woman interrupted gently. "We know, that's fine." She stepped closer and extended her hand. "I'm Clara, that's June, and that's Rose." Ethan shook her hand awkwardly. Her grip was firm, her smile calm. "So you live here?" he asked. Clara nodded. "We take care of the farm. We used to work for Mr. Dalton, the old owner. When he left, we stayed to keep it alive. Someone has to look after the land." Ethan looked around. Everything inside was neat. The floorboards were swept clean. Fresh flowers sat in a jar on the table. A fire burned softly in the stove. It didn't look abandoned at all. "I didn't know anyone was still here," he said quietly. Rose, the youngest, put down her paintbrush. "That's okay. You'll get used to us," she said with a grin. "Everyone does." Ethan didn't know what that meant, but something in her voice sounded playful, almost teasing. Clara turned back to the stove, stirring something in a pot. "You can stay in the big room upstairs," she said simply. "It's ready," he hesitated. "Wait, you're saying you're not leaving?" Clara looked over her shoulder. "Why would we? You bought the farm, not the people. We belong to this place." There was nothing unkind in her tone, but it left Ethan speechless. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. He realized he didn't really mind their presence. The house already felt warm because of them. That night, Ethan unpacked a few boxes and walked through the halls. The wooden walls carried faint echoes of laughter, soft footsteps, and the smell of home cooking. Through the window, he saw June hanging laundry under the moonlight, her dress fluttering in the breeze. The sight was strangely peaceful. He thought about telling them to leave in the morning, but part of him didn't want to. The next few days passed quietly. Clara managed most of the housework with steady hands and calm authority. June took care of the garden, spending hours among flowers, herbs, and vegetables. Rose painted furniture, repaired broken chairs, and sometimes sang old songs while she worked. They treated Ethan kindly, offering him food, coffee, and help with chores. He started fixing the fences, repainting the barn, and cleaning the old tractor. Whenever he worked outside, the women were nearby, busy with their own tasks but never far from him. At first, Ethan thought they were just being polite. But the longer he stayed, the more he felt like they were waiting for something. One afternoon, as rain began to fall, the 4 of them sat near the fire drinking tea. Rose told stories about the storms that came every spring. June talked about the animals they once had, and how the farm survived through the hard seasons. Clara listened more than she spoke, her calm eyes always studying Ethan like she was trying to read his thoughts. When the thunder rolled outside, Ethan said quietly, "This place feels different. Like it's alive." Clara smiled. "That's because it is. It remembers everyone who's lived here. We just take care of it." Later that night, after the rain stopped, he went to his room. But before he could close the door, Clara's voice came from the hallway. "Ethan," she said softly. He turned. She stood there in the dim light, her face calm, her tone certain. "You'll be sleeping with all of us." Ethan froze. His breath caught for a second, his mind racing. But her eyes held no mischief or shame. They were kind, steady, almost protective. June and Rose appeared behind her, both smiling gently as if they agreed completely. He didn't know how to reply. The words hung in the air, sounding less like an invitation and more like a statement. Something practical, something old, like a rule of the house. "I don't understand," he said quietly. Clara tilted her head.
"You will."
"No one lives here alone. This farm doesn't belong to one soul. It belongs to all who keep it alive. We share the work. We share the home, and yes, we share the rest too. That's how we survive out here." Her words weren't strange to her, but they left him speechless. The tone was calm, not romantic, not improper, just deeply serious. Ethan nodded slowly, unsure what else to do. "All right," he said softly, though he didn't fully know what he was agreeing to. That night, as the house grew quiet, he lay awake listening to the sound of wind in the trees and the faint hum of voices downstairs. He thought about his life before, about loneliness, about how empty city nights had been. Something about this place felt ancient, like a story that kept repeating with new people but the same heart. The women didn't seem to live by the world's rules. They lived by the rhythm of the land, and somehow that rhythm was already pulling him in. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but as he closed his eyes, he felt oddly safe. Maybe peace didn't always come the way one expected. Sometimes it came with mystery, warmth, and the feeling that you'd finally arrived exactly where you were meant to be. The next morning, sunlight touched the curtains and spread across Ethan's room. The sound of birds came through the open window, and the smell of bread baking drifted up from the kitchen. For a moment, he lay still, staring at the ceiling, remembering Clara's calm words from the night before. They echoed softly in his mind. When he went downstairs, Clara was already at the table, writing something in a small book. She looked up and smiled as if nothing unusual had happened. "Good morning," she said, her tone warm. "Breakfast is almost ready. June's in the garden and Rose went to check the barn roof." Ethan nodded, trying to act normal. He poured himself some coffee and sat across from her. "Clara," he said after a moment, "what you said last night, about us living together like that, what did you really mean?" She closed her book and looked at him quietly for a few seconds before answering. "I meant what I said," she replied gently. "This house doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to those who care for it. Here no one is above or below another. We share everything, work, food, laughter, even rest." Ethan frowned a little, trying to understand. "You mean like a family?" She smiled softly. "Yes, a real one. Not by blood, but by choice." Later, when he went outside, he saw June kneeling in the garden, her hands deep in the soil. She looked peaceful, moving slowly as she planted herbs in neat rows. He walked up beside her and asked if she needed help. She smiled and handed him a small shovel. "You can dig here," she said. "The ground listens better when more hands work together." They worked quietly for a while. The air was warm and bees moved lazily around the flowers. Finally, Ethan asked, "Did you all know each other before the farm?" June looked up, her soft eyes thoughtful. "We came here one by one," she said. "Different years, different reasons. Some of us had nowhere else to go. Some of us stayed because the land didn't let us leave." Her answer only made him more curious. "What do you mean the land didn't let you leave?" She smiled faintly. "You'll see. The farm decides who belongs." In the afternoon, Rose returned from the barn with her hands covered in dust and paint. She laughed when she saw Ethan sitting on the porch fixing a broken chair. "You're finally starting to look like you live here," she teased. He grinned. "Maybe I do now." Rose sat beside him, brushing dirt off her jeans. "Clara likes you," she said suddenly. "She doesn't say much, but she only smiles that way when someone belongs." Ethan laughed softly. "Belongs, huh? That's a new word for me. I've always been on my own, Rose looked at him kindly. "Not anymore," she said. That evening, they all gathered for dinner again. The table was simple, fresh bread, soup, roasted vegetables, but it felt rich with warmth. They ate together, sharing stories and laughter. When June told a funny story about chasing a runaway goat last spring, Rose laughed so hard she almost spilled her drink. Even Clara, usually calm and serious, laughed until her eyes watered. Ethan sat back and watched them, feeling something strange in his chest. It wasn't romantic or confusing, it was comfort, something deep and long forgotten. He had been lonely for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to sit at a table with people who cared that you were there. After dinner, the four of them sat by the fire as the wind outside grew stronger. The old house made soft sounds, creaks, sighs, whispers from its wooden frame. Ethan listened quietly as Clara began to speak in a low, calm voice. "Years ago," she said, "this farm belonged to a family that built it from nothing. They worked side by side, men, women, children, never separating their lives from the land. They believed that if they took care of it, it would take care of them. When storms came, they stayed together. When someone fell ill, the others helped. And when someone passed on, they planted a tree in their name." June nodded slowly, staring into the fire. "That's why the soil feels alive," she added. "It remembers." Rose leaned closer, her voice soft. "Mr. Dalton, the man before you, tried to change that. He wanted to run it like a business, not a home. The land grew tired of that. Everything he planted dried up, the barn caught fire, and one day he just left." Ethan sat silently. Their words weren't meant to scare him. They sounded like truth spoken in an old rhythm. "So," he said carefully, "you think the farm chooses?" Clara met his eyes. "I don't think it. I know it." Days turned into weeks. Ethan began to feel the change in himself. The quiet no longer felt heavy, it felt right. The morning started early, with dew on the grass and soft light spreading over the fields. They worked together side by side in perfect balance. One evening, as the sun was setting, Ethan climbed to the top of the hill behind the barn. From there, he could see the whole farm, the green fields, the fences, the river in the distance. Clara joined him after a while, her hands still dusty from work. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's alive," she answered. "Everything here listens. That's why we live the way we do. No walls between us, no secrets. When we rest together. When we rise together. That's what I meant that night." Ethan looked at her and understood finally. Her words about sleeping together weren't about anything improper. They were about trust, unity, and belonging. It was about living without loneliness. That night, they all sat on the porch as the stars appeared. June hummed a soft tune, Rose played with the dog that had wandered from the road, and Clara leaned back in her chair watching the night sky. Ethan spoke quietly. "You were right. The farm doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone who believes in it." Clara smiled without looking at him. "Now you understand why you were meant to find this place." Months passed. The fields grew strong again. The apple trees bore fruit for the first time in years. Travelers passing by sometimes stopped at the gate asking who owned the land. Ethan always smiled and said, "No one owns it. We just live here." The women stayed, of course. They had always been there, and now Ethan was part of them. Not as a stranger, but as family. Together, they built something rare, something most people never found in the busy world beyond the fields. Every season brought new work, new laughter, and new life. The house that once seemed too big for one man now felt just right for all of them. When storms came, they sat together by the fire. When summer arrived, they worked until sunset and sang old songs as they rested under the trees. One late autumn evening, Ethan stood outside watching the fields fade into gold. Clara joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. "You found what you were looking for?" she said softly. He nodded. "I think I found more than that." Clara smiled. "That's what this place does. It gives you what you didn't know you needed." As the wind brushed through the grass, Ethan felt peace settle deep inside him. He wasn't just living on the farm anymore. He was part of its story, its heart, and its quiet promise of belonging. And from that night on, whenever people in town spoke about the farm at the end of the dirt road, they said it was alive again. They said laughter had returned to it, and the lights glowed warm in the windows even through the darkest storms. Ethan never corrected them. He simply smiled, knowing that the farm had chosen him just as it had chosen Clara, June, and Rose. They were its keepers, its family, and its peace. In the end, it wasn't about who owned the land or who came first. It was about the bond they built, the kind that never breaks, the kind that doesn't need words to explain, the kind that finally let Ethan rest, truly rest for the first time in his life.